Hello, welcome to week 12. So in this video, I'll be chatting about uh, reactions to this discussion board. I'll talk a little bit about the career intervention proposal assignment, the last big assignment, and then go over some of the thoughts on the articles for this week on career counseling with special populations or with minority populations. So I don't have a lot of reactions actually with the discussion post, but I think a lot of great things were discussed about these approaches, with the spiritual approaches and the cognitive information processing approach. Overall, the one thing that kind of surfaced a lot talked about the Miller-Tiedemann approach and the idea of personal reality and common reality. So personal reality being what the individual believes is right for them. The common reality, what others believe the individual should do, or or what is right for that person. So Miller-Tiedemann kind of emphasized the personal reality, helping the client figure out what is right for them. Kind of at the, I don't know what exact word to use there, not detriment, or just it's kind of pushing away the outer influence and learning to kind of trust that inner influence. And that will work for some clients. That'll be great. That's kind of maybe what they want and feel like they need. But I think it's important as the career counselor or counselor in general that we just think about, that we're not imposing this on the client, or you should embrace your personal reality. Because once again, two things, maybe they don't agree with that. Number two, we are then becoming an common reality, an external reality that is imposing itself on the client, ironically at the same time. So, but it's I think this emphasis on the personal reality is very individualistic. It comes from like an individualistic cultural lens. And once again, some people will kind of be in that space and want us to kind of, embrace that paradigm. Individuals from more collectivistic backgrounds will probably want to honor the common reality much to a greater degree than people who are, very individualistic. So, and either one's not right or wrong or better, so, but it's important that, people could also be honored in valuing the common reality, wanting to be a part of that collective whole and embrace that reality to a larger degree. Obviously, we're talking about a continuum again. So, the collectivism and individualistic. So it's just something to be thinking about. What is the counselor's role in kind of navigating that continuum inside each client? In the end, our role is never to dictate where the client should be, or what beliefs, whether it's, on this continuum of individualism and collectivism, where they should be, which one's right or better. Like, it's really just helping the client explore themselves and exploring, their cultural lens and background, what works for them. Okay, I'm gonna just briefly chat a little bit about career intervention proposal assignments that's coming up, the last big assignment. So I think I'll create another video to go through the rubric, go through the assignment description, kind of start to give some ideas of what the paper could look like. But go to Blackboard. On the left-hand column, when you go into Blackboard, it should just be in the assignment section. So you click on assignments, then you can go down, you can see the career intervention proposal, you can click into it and see the rubric, you know what's expected there. In the end, though, what I'm asking for, and I'll go into this more detail in the other video that I'll post pretty soon, is I'm asking you to be creative. I'm asking you to kind of embrace the total, kind of synthesize what has resonated with you in this class. Which career theories or approaches, really stood out to you and really, connect and made sense to you as a clinician and as a person. And then applying that to a special population or a specific, client population that stands out to you, that you might see yourself working with in the future, or that you really feel, an excitement or kind of a feeling drawn to work with a client population. Obviously, this isn't committing you to actually, to utilize this proposal, but just my main point here is be creative and making it meaningful to you. Once again, more to be discussed later. Okay, so this week, obviously I'm not I'm not going to go over a lot that's in the written lecture, but this week we're talking about this is surfaced throughout this class of multiculturalism and how kind of the importance of culture in career development. There's significant influence from every individual's multicultural background, and how that influence then can play into career development and career decisions, career difficulties, career challenges. So yeah, that's I think something really important to be reflecting upon. So I'm going to go through each of the articles and just share a few thoughts. I'm not going to be exhaustive here. There's a lot discussed in these articles, so I'm just going to maybe throw out a few highlights. So in the Humes et al. Article, there was a quote on page 145 of the article. I'm just going to read it here. Berkowitz, 1985, has pointed to the tendency of counselors to adjust individuals when it is society that needs adjustment. I think that's kind of an interesting thought and point there, that oftentimes, and this article was specifically talking about working with people with disabilities. So sometimes counselors may be just saying, oh, the individual needs to change to be able to fit into society. But Berkowitz is saying, no, maybe society needs to change to better embrace the individual. So there's going to be a lot of it's kind of a paradigm shift for some people to have that shift in perspective. But one of the in the code of ethics, it talks about one of the roles of the counselor is to be an advocate, and to be an advocate can look very different. Each counselor can kind of decide what that looks like for themselves. But, I think Berkowitz is kind of getting into that. How can we be an advocate in helping, help society in a larger, more macro level embrace the individual, particularly a person with a disability, instead of saying, no, you change to meet our mold. So yeah, that can be a big task and an important task. Okay, so there's a few thoughts or a few steps in the Humes et al. Article that they discussed. So I talked about, in working with people with disabilities, it can be important to avoid using disabling language. The second point that I want to bring up, another train right by the train tracks, pretty loud. So always considering the effects of the environment and the individual's perceptions, so of career development, of that process. So the environment's going to be influencing career development and norms there, and then the individual is kind of going to be bringing their beliefs and perceptions and perspectives. So having, I think it's important to be thinking of both. What does the individual believe here and think, and how is the environment impacting this individual? Let's see. I really like another third point here, and I believe this was on page 145 to 146. It says emphasizing abilities rather than limitations. So I think this is taking much more of a strengths-based approach. How can we focus on, what is working well? What are these natural abilities, rather than just kind of overemphasizing what are the barriers? Obviously, we're not saying, or I'm not saying, let's minimize barriers and limitations and not address them, avoid them. Of course not. Obviously, it's, taking the client's lead in what they want to discuss. Maybe they really need to process the barriers and limitations to their disability, or of their disability in their career development. But at the same time, just kind of staying in that point, maybe clients are ready to say, what, but I have a lot to offer. There are a lot of abilities that I naturally possess, and I can bring those to the world, and I want to make sense of those and deciding how to integrate that into my career path. All right. And then the fourth point talks about recognizing the complexity of disability. And sometimes we may, coming from a generalist counseling background, unless you specialize in working with people with disabilities, you might kind of say or recognize, maybe getting a specialist support, a rehabilitation counselor or school psychologist might be helpful to integrate their services. I'm not going to go a lot into transitions, but that's something from the Humes article that I think was pretty helpful. Working with people with disabilities, all people, but particularly people with disabilities, to go through, what are those transitions that we're going through in life naturally, and maybe the transition from high school to either college or work or just whatever is post high school. That transition can be a huge transition, particularly of making sense of the disability, and what is my identity? Who have I been told that I am? What are the systemic influences on me as a person with disabilities? So I think there's just a lot that can go into navigating transition points. Okay, I'm going to shift to the Lindstrom et al. Article. Let's see here. So in this article, it talked about working with females with disabilities, and there's this pilot intervention that was used with 4 modules to help females with disabilities. And it can kind of be interesting or important to think about intersectionality. Maybe you've kind of talked about that or learned about that, but being a female in your career development, being a person with a disability in your career development, those are pretty different things. And it's also very different to be a female with a disability. So intersectionality kind of has to do with, okay, what are your social identities, and how can we think about all of them put together, not just just as a female or just as an individual with a disability, but a female with a disability. That's an intersectional approach of kind of what is that experience like. So that was kind of the intent of this article, of kind of helping females with disabilities in their career development. So I thought the 4 modules were pretty interesting, and this could be helpful in your discussion board for this week. So on pages 470 through 472, it talks about how the 4 modules, or this pilot intervention that we discussed, went over self-awareness. So helping the participants understand who they are, their beliefs of self, kind of increasing that reflection ability. And then, they talked about disability knowledge. So kind of this education process of their disability. And then they also went into gender identity. And lastly, they talked about career and college readiness. So those were the 4 modules that were addressed to kind of educate and prompt the development of females with disabilities. So the findings that they noticed were that the participants really appreciated that it was, the quote was, a girls only group. That was helpful to the participants to kind of to say, gender was a dynamic, an important dynamic in their feeling comfortable in addressing their career development. So that was meaningful to some of the participants. They felt that they gained a lot of self-awareness. The findings really highlighted that, as well as empowerment and voice. So these participants felt more able to, felt more comfortable and confident in addressing elements of being a female with disabilities, being able to address that with peers, with adults. So that empowerment of, I have a voice and I can share it, was important to these individuals. So once again, I think this article in particular may be really helpful to addressing the discussion post. Obviously be creative as well, but this gives you some ideas. Okay, the Pope article. This talks about working with lesbian and gay clients in their career development process. So a few things that I wanted to address here was, the counselor self-preparation and the client-focused interventions. Those were some major headings in this article, but the counselor self-preparation, I feel like a lot can go into this. So it's very, very important. And we're going to keep talking about this next week. And also I addressed it in the written lecture a little bit, but to gain self-awareness around all multicultural issues and minority populations, your beliefs of different populations is so important. So when working with clients who are lesbian and gay, it's important to process your personal biases, your beliefs, your internalized cultural viewpoints regarding sexual minorities. And sometimes that can be a hard process. Internalized cultural viewpoints are kind of, they've been developed for a long time, but taking the time and pausing to really dig deep into how can I help individuals who are gay or lesbian. What are my beliefs about this minority population? How might I have biases whether they're unconscious, and kind of how can I raise those to consciousness? That's a long process and it takes time. If you haven't taken the multicultural counseling course, that course will help in that regard. One thing that has been helpful to me is when I was a master's student, I was encouraged to go to just participate in some clubs on campus. Obviously, you're remote, so that might not be the exact same way since I was on campus in an on-campus master's program. But I was encouraged to go to a club for students who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, LGBT. So I did. I went to a club and just kind of got to know people who are sexual minorities, and that was really meaningful and helpful, just to get to know people in more depth from minority populations. And I think this doesn't just have to do with, members of the LGBTQ population, but it could be for any minority population that you can, just kind of gain that experiential opportunity, those experiential relationships, build relationships. I think that can be a big part of self-preparation and in navigating your personal biases, your beliefs, your internalized cultural viewpoints. Okay, just a few thoughts on the client-focused interventions. Pope talked a lot about the coming out process, kind of talking about coming out to self, that sometimes, members of the LGBTQ population, that's a big process, the coming out process. But there is this internal process of how can I kind of come to accept and embrace and come out to myself and be authentic in that. I feel okay about that, so that the article talks about that, but also coming out to others. That might be friends or close friends or family. And that's also coming out in the workplace or not, the client can choose not to do that. But that can often be an important part of exploration for people in the LGBTQ population, and that can be very important and central to career development. A lot of coming out to self, coming out to others, coming out in the workplace, in your career, for a lot of people, a career, like we've talked about in this class so much, it's personally significant. It creates a sense of belonging. You're with these people a lot, so if you don't feel that you belong or that you can be your full self or true self, obviously, I'm not advocating, or I don't think the article is advocating for oversharing and sharing more than you feel comfortable with. But I think it's just speaking to, do you feel that you belong? Do you feel that you can, be who you are? So yeah, that can be a central element of working with clients in their career development process. Let's see, looking at my notes here. I think that's sufficient for addressing the coming out process. Obviously, it goes into a lot more specifics, the Pope article does. So, you can kind of glean through that and find some of the more specifics about coming out to self, coming out to others, coming out in the workplace, and how to support people in that coming out process. I kind of felt, this is my last thought on this article, I sometimes felt that this article might be a little dated. It seems like it was emphasizing the the counselor's direction of, the coming out process. The coming out process is a very personal process for the clients. So my bias and belief is that the counselor follows the client lead in that. And I think that's best practice, especially nowadays, when this has been explored a lot more in academic spheres. I think the Pope article is from 2004. But yeah, I think you can run into problems if the counselor starts to kind of push the coming out process. So that is not appropriate. And, I'd strongly encourage you to not do that. Pope didn't say do that. The counselor's role is to do that, but it's kind of to me at times implying that the counselor can take more of an active role. Obviously, it's not avoiding that topic, of coming out. But, if the counselor tries to kind of nudge or push or encourage too much, it can maybe move more into, being a little more intrusive than helpful. Okay, the last article, the Singh, and I don't know how to pronounce the last name, Kasu, possibly. This is supporting LGBTQ youth in school environments. So for some reason with this article, I just had questions, reflection questions, and I'll kind of end with that. But so it led me to reflect on the importance of the relationship. That's been something common that I've been sharing throughout this class is, so from this article, what do you learn about the importance of the relationship in counseling? How important is the relationship in career counseling and career development work? And so then, like, going a little bit deeper, what is the role of the relationship in career counseling? Different career theories are going to kind of talk about the relationship in different ways or completely disregard the relationship. But maybe in your own words, if you could, just reflect and think about, like, how can the counseling relationship help youth who are in the LGBTQ population? And I think that goes to belonging, that goes to empathy. When clients experience empathy, they often then, through time, translate that to self-empathy. And that's part of the relationship. If I can feel genuine with this counselor, maybe I can be more genuine with myself and with other people outside of the counseling relationship. If I can feel trusted and respected by this counselor, maybe I can trust and respect myself, and I can, develop trusting and respectful relationships in my family and career life. So I think that's some idea of, like, the counseling relationship. This is going into my beliefs, so I'll just be transparent about that. Not every professional is going to emphasize or value this as much, but from my perspective, the counseling relationship is central because it's experiential development. Through the relationship, the client is experiencing a different type of relationship that then changes their inner relationship, as well as can begin to translate to other relationships outside of the counseling work. So I think this is particularly important for youth who are LGBTQ, because, I thought of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Obviously safety, shelter, those are really important needs. But then some of those central hierarchical needs are love and belonging, just feeling a sense of belongingness, of community. So that can be incredibly important to develop with youth who are LGBTQ, and that counseling kind of help stimulate that feeling of belonging and knowing how can I feel, like, what does belongingness feel like? Some clients maybe haven't felt that. So just some things to think about with the counseling relationship and supporting youth. Okay, there's a few more notes that I was just looking over, but I think we've addressed this sufficiently. Just in conclusion, just be thinking about your own self-awareness around, working with minority populations. I think it requires deep levels of empathy in working with minority populations. Empathy for yourself as a clinician, because we need to be able to deeply reflect on who we are and have, grace and be willing to change and grow and be humble. And then, also deep levels of empathy in working with the client, helping them experience that deep level of empathy. So yeah, it's a constant reflective process. And I think that goes for every single client that comes through the door. Everyone has a cultural background. Everyone is a multicultural being. And then there are multicultural populations who are, experiencing barriers that majority population members likely aren't. So that's the special need, the special population focus, is that there are minority populations who need counseling support. So those are my thoughts for today. I look forward to the discussion board this week, and feel free to continue to reach out to me. More people have started to via email, and also via Zoom to discuss assignments and just the class in general. So I'd be happy to keep chatting with you. Thanks.